What's up, skeptics? Thomas Westbrook here. It's been almost 4 years since the last episode of Animated Bible Myths, and part of the reason for that is because a couple of my family members were particularly offended that I would call God Dingleberry. Even though I never called him Dingleberry, I called him Dinkleberry. But while I'm free to disregard their opinions, I realize that although humor and satire can be incredibly powerful tools, simply being offensive for its own sake may not be the most effective way to reach people. So I put the series on the back burner, but kept a high-level Patreon tier if anyone really wanted me to bring it back. And after 4 years, our Messiah has finally arrived! This episode is brought to you by Anthony Guthrie, so make sure that you write them poems of adulation in the comments below and vote the best one to the top by liking them. I will be slowly rebranding Dink though by changing his name to Barry, popping him in a suit and depicting him as a regular old planet builder working for the Yahweh Corporation. Enjoy! This is Barry, the creator of a rather unremarkable planet on the edge of the Milky Way galaxy called Earth. He took artistic liberty with his planet by filling it with a particularly stupid breed of apes called humans. Now, to say that management was remotely happy about this decision would be like calling the blobfish a creature of rare beauty. They retroactively allowed it, however, on the condition that he handled his delicate new case with kid gloves. But it took Barry all of a galactic microsecond before he drowned the humans to within 8 heads of extinction. One lone boatload of plants and animals survived the global drizzle by nestling aboard a giant floating splinter. For more on that, check out my 2-part video on Noah. With his human experiment teetering on the edge of failure, Barry needed to act. He needed this lone surviving family to be fruitful and repopulate the Earth, so he briefly lifted his ban on incest. Every animal was basically an endangered species at this point, and since the flood destroyed all vegetation, they basically had to adopt a seaweed-only diet for a while. But as if things weren't tough enough already for the last remaining animal duets, along came Noah's great-grandson Nimrod. Much to the chagrin of the animals, Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. What exactly he hunted isn't exactly clear though. Perhaps the world's first inbred gazelle. Nimrod also built at least 8 cities, although who he populated them with isn't really clear either. At the heart of his new ghost town empire sat Babylon, where a large construction project was about to begin. This is the story of the Tower of Babel. It's only been a few generations since the Great Drowning, so the few survivors in this harsh, barren, post-apocalyptic wasteland are understandably terrified, if not traumatized. And now Barry's telling them not to stick together, but to wander off alone for some good old-fashioned sister boinking. And that's when the little inbred suddenly got a brilliant idea. What if instead of leaving the group, they all lived close together? They could stack bricks on top of one another and build a community tower to function as a kind of gathering point should any of them get lost. Barry had told them to spread out and fill the Earth, but he hadn't specified on which axis. There were only 100 or 2 humans at this point, but they settled in and started stacking. Just how high could they pile this brick Jenga skyscraper? 215 feet? Like the unsupported Monadnock building? Surely they could do better. Perhaps if they made the base extremely thick. 400 feet? Like Jetavanaramaya? It's an impressive looking boob, no doubt, but still not good enough. Perhaps they could invent steel support beams 3,000 years ahead of schedule. Sadly, that wasn't an option, but they needed to push brick construction to its absolute limit. You don't say. 585 feet? Surely they weren't attempting something as tall, as truly audacious as the smelter stack of Anaconda, Montana. That would be madness for a civilization that still hadn't learned to wash their hands after they poop. They wanted to reach into the heavens, because everyone knows that God is a Jack-and-the-Beanstalk giant.
Duh.
No, it would take more than concrete and steel beams, more than mass dampeners to counteract the resonance oscillation caused by vortex shedding from the wind. They wouldn't need concrete foundations, wind tunnels for testing, computer simulations, tower cranes, or advanced concrete pumps. They wouldn't even need electric elevators or oxygen supplies for high-altitude construction. Au contraire, none of that would be necessary. They only needed bricks and tar. The compressive forces from the extreme weight of bricks would not be an issue. Thermal expansion would not be an issue because they had one secret weapon, a tool so powerful that nothing would be impossible for them. And that tool was a single common language. So they got to stacking. One story up, all was well. 2 stories? No issues yet. But as time dragged on and the tower grew, Barry decided to check in on his little rainfall Holocaust survivors. So he, and I quote, came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. And that's when he realized, if as one people speaking one language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Perhaps he was intimidated. Perhaps at that point he really did live in the clouds. Or perhaps he was scared that they would develop spaceships and leave the planet before he was able to pull off his Jesus campaign. So Barry took action, and he took action fast. He confused their languages in hopes of scattering them to every corner of the globe. Now, Christians often overlook the fact that God's only listed concern in the Tower of Babel story is that with one language humanity might be able to accomplish anything that they set their mind to, before he proceeds to sabotage, confuse, and scatter them, which was a very odd strategy for 2 reasons. One, because the tallest building ever built, the Burj Khalifa, was built by 12,000 workers representing 100 nationalities and speaking every major language on Earth. Linguistic diversity clearly didn't hinder them from accomplishing this gargantuan architectural feat. And 2, because we know from history that during this time period, Mesopotamia didn't explode outward in a kind of linguistic Big Bang. Instead, just the opposite happened. Where there were once many languages in the region, one common language developed, Akkadian. And for more than a millennium, it would become the common tongue in the region, the lingua franca of diplomacy and trade, bringing surrounding nations together, with one dominant writing system lasting for over 1,000 years, cuneiform. It would be used for communication between Egypt, Canaan, Babylon, and Assyria, in fact, through most of the known world at the time. On top of that, the Tower of Babel is widely believed by Bible scholars to have been a Mesopotamian ziggurat. But despite the story of Babel, people continued to build cities in Mesopotamia, and at least 25 more ziggurats would be constructed in the region. But at least Barry gave linguists something to keep themselves busy with for a while. Now here's where things get a little bit interesting. Christians will often argue that God's plan is perfect. They claim that he sent Jesus to die for our sins at the perfect time in history, and that the reason he waited for nearly 4,000 years after original sin to send his son is because he was waiting for the Romans to create the infrastructure for the gospel to spread easily. That once there was a peaceful empire with roads and one common language, the story of Jesus could easily spread throughout the world. He didn't need to wait for video cameras, the printing press, or the internet, just for a common language. And the first place award for shooting yourself in the foot goes to... They had one language, you goof! If you're a Christian and you feel like my satirizing of this story is offensive or belittling of your God, I want to make one thing abundantly clear. The story does that all on its own. God is depicted as a cloud dweller threatened by a mud brick tower who only becomes more incompetent when you take the big picture of the fall, the flood, and Jesus into account. To this day, there's a juicy irony that the number one hindrance to the spread of the gospel is the multiplicity of languages, which has been an uphill battle for Bible translators for centuries. This story works as a mythological placeholder to explain the rise of languages, and while there isn't a shred of truth to it, if you want to believe it's true, you also kind of gotta accept God as an utter nincompoop. Now, I'm going to be covering more of the historical inaccuracies of the Tower of Babel in my other series, Nothing Fails Like Bible History. So smash that like button, subscribe to Holy Kool-Aid, and hit the bell button to make sure that you're notified when that's released. And if you want to support my work, you can do so with a per video pledge on patreon.com/holykoolaid or on Subscribestar, or with a one-time PayPal donation. Thank you so much to all of my current supporters, and as always, dare to be curious, but don't drink the Kool-Aid.